Welcome. It's Dean Legge. It's Sunday night. That means it's time for the Dean Legge Show here on Dog Post. If you're watching me for the first time, I have covered Georgia for the last 18 years, and we do this show every Sunday night. It's a tradition. It's a ritual. It gets you through the season. So every Sunday night, plan on checking it out. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Joining you just after Georgia beat up on Tennessee 38-12. It was not the most exciting game I've ever seen on earth. A lot of mistakes, certainly from Georgia in that time. But the Bulldogs win, another double-digit win for Georgia over an SEC foe. I mean, this is probably not the worst game Georgia played the entire season. I think they were a little bit worse against Missouri. I do not think they played well against Missouri, generally speaking. But the defense played much better on Saturday afternoon against Tennessee. So, it's just one of those games where for the Dogs, they need to continue to improve. It's it's getting close to crunch time here. I mean, they'll play LSU very soon, and if they are not ready to go in that game, they certainly could lose it or will lose it or whatever. And that's not at all what you want. But this is, the level of expectation at Georgia now has become so high that there's almost no victory that will be good enough. I think Georgia played well. I do not think they played up to their potential, and I think that's now what they're going to be judged by every single time they get out on the field, and that's not always a lot of fun. I know for me, I don't always do my best when I do my job, but I think they played okay. I think it could have been a lot better, put it to you like that. But it's they've won. They're the number 2 team in the country, and it's time to keep moving on. I think for Georgia, this weekend against Vanderbilt, it's not going to be the most complicated game on earth. This is not a good Vanderbilt team right now, and they are coming off of barely surviving Tennessee State earlier this week on Saturday. They just do not look good. I mean, the way they played against Notre Dame, they certainly played well, and Notre Dame certainly seems like a good team. But Vanderbilt, they just it's hard to really trust Vanderbilt to be a team that you need to be scared of. I guess you could say it's not a team that I don't think it's a team that Georgia should really be worried about. But this is really if it's about playing up to a standard, Georgia's not done that really well lately. They've played and they've defeated their foes, but that's not exactly the same thing as playing up to the standard that they're trying to live up to, at least for them. So if you're going to talk about the standard that you're setting and not living up to it, it can't be super surprising, really, that so many fans are sort of jumpy right now about Georgia. But I think that this Georgia team has plenty of potential for sure, and plenty of time to still get where they need to go. I mean, this is going to be about winning the national championship or winning the SEC championship or whatever. I mean, this is not about looking great all the time. The one team in the entire country that's really looked good the entire year has been Alabama. There's no question Alabama has looked good the entire time, everybody they've played. The question is, does the schedule that they have played, is it really up to par with what Ohio State's played? Or maybe even Georgia. I mean, A&M is certainly a quality team. Are they better than Missouri? I don't know. We'll find out because they play one another, if I'm not mistaken. But is South Carolina better than Louisville? Probably. So, and it's also the interesting thing here is that it's shaping up that Georgia is going to play a more Georgia is going to play a more complicated schedule than Alabama because they will have played both Missouri and Kentucky, whereas Alabama will skip them, and Georgia, of course, will play LSU and will play Auburn. So the two of the best teams in the West, Georgia will play. They will play, two of the best three. They're not going to play Alabama in the regular season. So that's not something anybody needs to worry about quite yet. But it's, it was one of these games that I think everybody came in expecting Georgia to just simply run through Tennessee. It doesn't always work like that in sports. Tennessee played pretty well, I thought, particularly for what they are. They barely functioned on offense with the 200 yards, but they fought pretty hard on defense, and Georgia left a few plays on the field. I think the basic question here is, if Georgia plays really well, what does that look like? They have not hit a game yet where they are just sort of unstoppable, so to speak. And, if we've learned anything through these last few years, it's that you play well when you need to play well. And playing well all the time really helps that, but it's easier said than done. Now, it sounds like I'm making a lot of excuses. What I would say is Jake Fromm has got to play better, but in order for Jake Fromm to play better, this offensive line, who really has been, to me, sort of above criticism for a while, they've got to give him more time. That's the way that Jake Fromm plays. Excuse me. He goes through progressions. He is, I don't know if he's deliberative, but sometimes his biggest plays are when he's getting 3-5 seconds worth of protection. He is human, so just like every other quarterback, he does not do unbelievable under pressure. He's not overwhelmingly gifted in terms of run game. So in order for Jake Fromm to play well, I think that the offensive line needs to play better, because Jake plays a particular way at quarterback that Justin Fields or Tua does not. Justin looks really good right now. I think that he needs to play more. That's my opinion. I think that was my opinion last week too, coming into the Tennessee game, and he did. So that's a good thing. But this offense is not clicking in a way that we're used to seeing. Certainly not in the way that we're used to seeing, in the way that Georgia has racked up points over these last 20 games. So, but they're still scoring at a significant pace. More than 40 points a game they're averaging, even in conference play, I'm pretty sure. So it's not like they're struggling, but they need to kind of get better, so to speak, and certainly get better. That's the way I would argue it, at least. All right, if you are joining me, my name's Dean Legge. This is Dean Legge Show, presented by Bank South. We've got Twitter, we've got YouTube, we've got Facebook, here for the first time in a long time, Facebook. So welcome to everyone. We do this every Sunday night and Tuesday night. If you're watching, I appreciate you. Dog Post is something that I've run for 18 years now. It's something I've started from scratch and have owned since. If you are a big Georgia fan, you're missing out if you're not checking out Dog Post, DAWGPOST.com. And, it's $1 for a month to try out. And occasionally I answer questions. I don't always answer questions. Some people are also listening on iTunes. So that's why I try to not go too far astray with questions. It used to be that I had the ability to answer every single question everybody asked. I wish I could do that now, but there's about 200 of y'all asking questions right now across all these platforms. I think generally speaking, this team, there was a question on one of the social media accounts about, is this team equipped to be like it was last year? Well, yeah, but you're missing two very good running backs, and the running backs that you've got are not the same running backs as you had last year. The offensive line should be better. It's sort of getting there. They're going to play the way they play. Georgia is not going to change the way that they are. They are very much built to beat you up the entire game, and then all of a sudden you have problems in the fourth quarter. Well, what happened against Tennessee? Exactly that. What happened against Missouri? I mean, that's what happened. What's concerning a little bit is that teams are scoring late. Missouri did that. Georgia never did really put them away. They put Tennessee away, although Tennessee was never really in the game. What people want is blood. They want it every single week. They want total domination. The only team we've seen do that so far is Alabama, and Georgia's not Alabama. They can beat Alabama. Certainly vice versa. I mean, Alabama's clearly the number one team in the country. But Alabama has got issues too. Their kicking game is suspect. But Tennessee wasn't going to play that game at all. Tennessee was going to play the game. Tennessee wanted to play when they had any sort of control, which was when they were on offense. And they were going to stick in there as long as they could. They were going to slow down the game. They did that too. It was just, it was just not the beating that a lot of people suspected. And kudos to Tennessee. I mean, they get credit for playing well, and they lost by 26 points. I expect something, basically similar this Saturday night in Athens. Vanderbilt has not played well this season, with the exception of the Notre Dame game. They just have not played well. So this should not be a contest that is in doubt. And I think that if you're Georgia, you want to play well this week. I don't think losing is something that is really a concern, but I do think you want to play well. If you can play well, it's that would be good, because they've not really played well lately, or up to their standard, as they call it. Someone was asking about Kentucky. Could Kentucky challenge this team? I think they totally can challenge them in a one-game scenario in Lexington, particularly if the game is at night. Kentucky is very similar to Georgia in what they do. The problem for Kentucky is that they do not have the depth of Georgia. They don't have the skill players of Georgia. But everything else is very similar. And they're going to do what they did in 2016, which is roll around with Georgia as long as they can. They're going to, really physically confront Georgia. But that game is a long. I mean, Georgia got several physical games before that game. That run between, Kentucky. What is it? That Kentucky, Florida, Kentucky, Auburn is a brutal stretch for Georgia. I mean, it really is, if you think about it. It's a game or a stretch of season that will determine, what this team will be going into the playoff. And I'm assuming they go to the playoff. I'm not certain they will. But if you look at the national landscape, and I wrote about this on Dog Post earlier, there's not a lot of teams outside of Alabama that you just pencil in. Oklahoma has looked bad. Ohio State has been okay. Ohio State and Georgia about the same ballpark. Clemson has struggled. I mean, they've got 2 wins by a total of 5 points against teams that aren't ranked. I mean, Clemson's been underwhelming so far. I think people got to watch out for West Virginia, but everybody can't, go to the playoff. So the main competition is Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, Oklahoma, etc. So it's a rough run here that Georgia's got to go through, with LSU, and then a week off, then the Gators. Then a trip to Kentucky, which has never been a place Georgia's played overwhelmingly well. Certainly not at night. They have not played well at night there. I think people think, it's Kentucky, no big deal. Well, they're an SEC team just like everybody else, and it becomes very difficult to win on the road no matter where you play. Missouri is tough. Everybody talked about how difficult South Carolina was. Georgia blew them out. But these are no cupcakes. Now, 2 of their road games are done. So they've got these last 2. They certainly need to survive at least one of them, if not both, to get to where they want to go, which is Atlanta. I mean, Kentucky could lose this week to Texas A&M. We'll see. But, I don't know. There's some questions here about the recruits on campus. On Dog Post, we cover this. We had something up Saturday before the game. There was plenty of discussion about guys like Clay Webb, Jaden Hazelwood was in town. How about Trayvon Walker? They had quite a few kids in town. All you got to do is go to dogpost.com and check that out. I think the article is a free article. So let's just see. Now, I talked enough about Kentucky. I don't know if this is Kentucky's best team ever. That 1977 team, I think it was a really good Kentucky team that finished 10-2. But they were not eligible to win the league, I think, or that was the last time they won the conference championship. Jeff Van Note was on that team, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a good Kentucky team, but that's 6 weeks away, a long time. I mean, people are starting to get nervous about Kentucky. You got to go play LSU, and you got to play the Gators. I think Georgia will be favored in both of those games. I think winning both those games is not at all out of the question, believe me. I think they're better than both those teams. I'm not so sure how much better they are than LSU, but they are better. And a lot different. I mean, the quarterbacks at Georgia are better. Probably the running backs are better. But LSU has a gutty win over Auburn, and they have a good win over Miami, although Miami just seemed to really not show up for that game. So we do these every Sunday night. If you're just joining us, everybody on YouTube, I appreciate it, and everyone on Facebook, if you're watching this, I appreciate that. Twitter, the entire plethora of Dog Post outlets. It's Dean Legge Show, sponsored by Bank South. We appreciate it, you joining us, and we appreciate you going and checking out Dog Post, dawgpost.com. It's $1 for a month. If you're not interested, just go read the free stories. No big deal. There's a question about Will Muschamp being in trouble at South Carolina. I don't think so at all. But they're going to need to continue to win. It would have been good, I think, for Carolina to play that game against Marshall and get a win there. They'd be 3-2 right now. Nobody expected Kentucky to be this good. But these things happen. Teams occasionally show up, show out, and are good. For Georgia, it's really a good thing, frankly, to have this sort of competition because you want margin for error in your season. Kentucky being good is a good thing. You want Florida to continue to win. The LSU Florida game, I don't know who really people want, to win that game. I think most Georgia fans would want LSU to win, but Georgia in the global scheme of things really should want both, LSU and Florida to win as many games as possible, and Georgia beat them. So, it's a long season, and you never know. A couple of things, someone's touching here on how well Sony, Nick, and Todd Gurley had this weekend. Those guys, it's amazing how good they were in 2014. What that team could have been with a stable of running backs that really, I don't know that they were ever all healthy at the same time, or generally speaking, eligible to play. So not surprised that those guys did as well as they have in the league. They're Todd is the best running back I've ever seen in person, including Herschel Walker. So take that. But he's just unbelievable. And Nick obviously played really well today. Did Nick get more than 3 carries? Because it looked like he only had 3 carries with 2 long touchdowns. Maybe I read that wrong. But if he's not getting 7 carries, there's something kind of wrong there to me. I would want Nick Chubb to play more. We can discuss Herschel Walker versus Todd Gurley, but all you have to do is consider that linebackers weighed lower than 200 pounds, and offensive linemen were my size, so 6'5", 250. So no, it's not. Todd. You can be 2 things at the same time, which is, Todd can be better than Herschel Walker, but Herschel Walker be the greatest college football player of all time. By the way, Herschel would do pretty well in 2013, 14, 12 himself, but I would be very curious to watch Todd Gurley in 1980 to 82. I mean, it would be scary. And in fact, some of these running backs back then, that's why Herschel and Bo Jackson were just such freaks back then. Looking like an oversized, offensive lineman running a 4.4. It was nuts. So those guys are special, Bo and Herschel. I just would be very curious to see. I'm sure Herschel would be very interested to see. Well, first of all, for the space-time continuum or whatever it's called, that would be fascinating. To travel back in time or forward in time, just to pull that off would be, for humankind, would be absolutely crazy. But it would be interesting to see Herschel now. I think Herschel now would be fine. I would be interested to see Todd back then. That would be nuts. There was something I wanted to touch on not so long ago that someone posted, and I'm forgetting what it was. Again, people are not going to give Georgia credit if they play well against Vanderbilt. People are not going to give Georgia credit if they blow them out. They will completely criticize them if they don't play well, I guess you could say. So it is important for Georgia to get out there and play well, beat them around, beat them up. There's no scenario by which Vanderbilt should be sticking around with Georgia for very long in this game, and it just shouldn't. Someone was asking me about the betting line for the LSU game, and Georgia, the last I looked, was favored slightly. Excuse me, and these are what's called predictive lines. They're not real lines, and there's a member on Dog Post. Dog Post is quite a community. I know a lot of y'all watching right now are Dog Post people, but it's an eclectic bunch of people who love Georgia and take it very seriously. And one guy is very much into the how do I put this, mathematics of gambling, futures and so forth. I am too. I don't gamble because I have a brain, but it is indicative of what you should expect going into a game. Like probably Georgia right now would be like a 9 or an 8-point underdog to Alabama. They would probably be favored against everybody else. Maybe Ohio State would be a toss-up. Let me touch on this too. Someone was asking about Jimbo. I really don't like the grabbing of a face mask by a coach. It's unnecessary. It is physical, frankly. I know this is a physical sport, but I don't think that is necessary. I think a lot of times talking is underrated, but grabbing by the face mask is just, it's demeaning, first of all, to me. I do not think, and it's the only sport where you can do that. You can't grab someone by the face in basketball or baseball, and it's not what you should be doing to a student athlete that you're supposed to be taking care of. I did not like that. I don't like that. If that were my kid, I would have a real problem with that. I don't have a real problem with it right now because it's really none of my business. But I don't like that. I don't think you have to do that. Again, I think a lot of times communication, we don't communicate well, and sometimes when we try to physically communicate, that's a problem. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And this is coming from someone who has children and knows how difficult they can be / they are. So I didn't like that, but people make mistakes. I don't know if Jimbo just does that or not. It's not for me. I never liked it when Lee Holtz did it. I don't think you should be, just as a person who's played college sports and been on board trustees and stuff, I would not like seeing that at an institution that is representing, that you're representing. So that's me. Georgia will kick off against Vanderbilt at 7:30 on the SEC Network. Now that means, not like anyone really cares, but that means that this game will not be metered. So it will not have a viewership number. Georgia had crept into the top 10, even though not playing a primetime game yet. So the Tennessee game should get about 4 million people, maybe 5. I doubt 5. But, the Tennessee not being good makes a difference. So that game may be in the 3 million mark, but that will keep Georgia moving forward. They'll get a huge number no matter what against LSU. The Gators, they probably will play on CBS against Kentucky. They could play 4 games in a row on CBS in a 5-week period. I mean, we already know they're going to play against the Gators. They will get LSU on the road. That game will certainly be a CBS game. They're off. Gators, we already know. Kentucky, that game could be CBS as well. And then Auburn will almost certainly be a CBS game. And at that stage, you will have hit your 5 total CBS games that you can play. My prediction for the LSU viewership would be north of 6 million. I mean, that could be a 9 million viewer game. That's going to be one of the top 10 viewed games this year in the regular season. Georgia had 3 of the top 4 games played. No, 3 of the top 5 games played last year because of Clemson, Alabama. So, national championship game was number 1. National championship game was 1. The Rose Bowl was 2. Sugar Bowl was 3. 4 was, I believe 4 was, it might have been another bowl game, but I know that Georgia Auburn in the championship game and Georgia Auburn in the regular season were also extremely highly rated, and they were top 10 games that season. Georgia Auburn in the SEC championship game was the most viewed game of the regular season. I don't know why championship is considered the regular season. I guess because it's not bowls. This is a common question. I want to shoot this down while I can. As you can tell, I do pay a lot of attention to TV stuff. Any chance CBS would take their doubleheader and make LSU a night game? Now, I don't have the contract for CBS and the SEC, but I can assure you that they are not permitted to move the games that are night. They have one night game a year, and that is typically the weekend of Alabama LSU. So they cannot move it to where LSU would be a night game. That is not possible. Here's a question: wouldn't they be at the 5-game limit with the South Carolina game? Good question. The first 2 weeks are not they are not controlled by CBS. They are what's called sub-licensed. This has become a real issue in the industry because CBS and ESPN have to share. And at the beginning of this contract, CBS had the U.S. Open. Well, now they don't have the U.S. Open because ESPN has it, blah, blah, blah. So CBS has 2 additional weekends a year, week 1 and week 2, where they got to fill games. So Georgia, South Carolina was on CBS only because it was underneath the sub-license of ESPN. So essentially, Georgia, South Carolina was bought by CBS and played on ESPN, played underneath ESPN's contract. So there was probably some horse trading there. I do know the scuttlebutt was that LSU Auburn was supposed to be an ESPN game, and CBS got it. That was kind of not a lot of fun. But the first South Carolina Georgia, this first appearance on CBS this year was not a CBS SEC contract. It was ESPN. It's a long story. But Tennessee Georgia, LSU Georgia, Georgia Florida, Kentucky Georgia, Georgia Auburn. Those 5 games should all be on CBS. It would not. Then after that, they can't do any more. So, obviously Georgia Vanderbilt's out. So any other game that Georgia would play, I don't think they play. After that, they're kind of done. I mean, they play UMass at home, which obviously would not be on CBS, and then they play at Georgia Tech at home. Georgia Tech could be on CBS, but they're not going to take that. So they're going to that game. If they take Kentucky, Georgia Tech would not be eligible for CBS, but they're going to take Auburn, Alabama anyway because it gets them a huge number. A couple more questions here before we wrap up. Here's a question about Justin Fields, Jake Fromm. I think that we're not going to see. I mean, we are a long way from seeing Justin Fields starting. We are not a long way from seeing Justin Fields play more. I think that people get so emotional about about quarterbacks. They become particularly emotional about Jake Fromm. But Jake Fromm is not above it. He has to play well. He is the starter. He's earned being the starter, but Justin Fields has earned playing more, and I think we're going to see that over time. Justin looks good. There was one last TV question about could ABC get Georgia Tech. No, not in Athens and not anywhere. Georgia, any SEC home game, competition, volleyball, soccer, cannot be broadcast on anything other than ESPN for all other sports or CBS for football. Whenever you see Georgia basketball game, Georgia's playing the Gators on CBS in basketball, that is a game that CBS has purchased from ESPN. That is not a classic CBS game. CBS does not have a contract like that. So it is, ABC has a limited, they have no rights to any home SEC game. ABC is not permitted in any way to do that. All right, last question here, and we'll be Tuesday night, Sunday nights, about 8:30, 8:45, sometimes 9. Do you think the SEC will expand again? You know what? Right now, I don't. I don't think there's any value out there. I think the only team that could possibly bring value, maybe NC State, but you've got to carry them with someone. And I just don't see the value of adding NC State and Virginia Tech or Clemson. And what are you getting there? You've already got South Carolina. Texas, you've already got Texas A&M. Oklahoma, you'd have to bring in Oklahoma State. There's scenarios that you could have. I mean, eventually the Big 12 is going to dissolve. The question is if the SEC really wants to get into that ball game. I just don't think so. I think the TV networks would tell you it would only bring so much more value. I expect the Oklahoma schools and Texas and someone to go to the Pac-12 here at some point. I don't know when. I do not see a scenario where the SEC would add schools. I will say this: I do not see this ever happening. If there were a scenario where the SEC could get North Carolina and Duke, that would be the only scenario which I could see it ever expanding. And that would be like Georgia and Alabama leaving to go to the ACC. It's just not going to happen. There's just no scenario. And they're not going to allow Clemson or Florida State in. Georgia, South Carolina would have a complete conniption fit if Clemson were let in. There's no scenario by which Florida State would be permitted to come in if Florida and Georgia had anything to say with it, or Auburn or Alabama. You got to remember the old guard of the SEC. Georgia, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, they are not going to allow their power to be dissolved any further than they can. And that's where North Carolina and Duke would be the only scenario, all which I would say, tiny percentage chance of that ever happening. The SEC would be nuts not to want them, but you'd have to make the math work. I don't know if the math would work. I mean, it's I don't know that I could see that making sense for the SEC. I appreciate y'all being on. This is Dean Legge from Dog Post. Thank you for joining me this Sunday night. We will be back on Tuesday night. Join us.